Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation on COVID-19 and its impacts in Brazil. My name is Roberta Braga. I'm an Associate Director and Brazil Lead here at the Adrian Arsh Latin America Center of the Atlantic Council. Before we get started, I'd like to give a very special thank you to our partners for today's event, the Brazilian Center for International Relations, SEBRI, and briefly pass the mic over to Teresa Rossi before introducing our speakers. Teresa, the mic is yours for a minute.
Thank you, Roberta. On behalf of the Brazilian Center for International Relations, I would like to take a brief moment to thank the Atlantic Council for the long-lasting partnership discussing perspectives for the Brazil-United States bilateral relationship, which also translates into very enriching opportunities to debate Brazilian domestic politics from an international perspective, and, in this case, global issues that also affect Brazil. SEBRI has been promoting a series of online debates to discuss the current sanitary crisis with international partners, based on the conviction that an efficient global response to the coronavirus involves sharing experiences and best practices, on the opinion that this crisis will profoundly impact the multilateral system, and on the awareness that how Brazil handles the situation will affect the country's international image and insertion. With nothing further to add, I pass the microphone back to Robert.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's been a pleasure working with SEBRI throughout all of this. I wanted to give a little bit of a context before we get started with our speakers. I don't have to say this, but as of today, over 77,000 cases have been confirmed in Latin America. That's nearly 48% more than last Thursday alone. And in Brazil, there are over 28,000 confirmed cases and over 1,700 deaths. We all know that Brazil is the largest, most populous country in Latin America. It's the biggest economy in the region and houses some of the largest cities in the world. Around 85% of Brazil's population live in urban areas. And in the case of Brazil, upwards of around 40% of workers operate in the informal sector. The peak of COVID's impact in Brazil is still ahead. It's been predicted to hit between May and August this week by the Ministry of Health. And in breaking news, for anyone who has been following Brazil, about an hour ago, Brazil's Minister of Health, Henrique Mandetta, was called into a meeting with President Jair Bolsonaro. This came following weeks of tension as the two disagreed on the policies to counter the spread of the virus. And about 30 minutes ago, Minister Mandetta announced he was being fired from his post. Initial reports confirming now that Minister Mandetta is likely to be officially replaced by the oncologist Nelson Teich. That's definitely something we'll be talking about today with our speakers. And so I'd like to take a moment to introduce everyone to discuss the implications of COVID in Brazil today, the country's approach to controlling the spread, what more can be done, and what we can expect going forward. I'm happy to start the introduction with Alana Riso, who is founder of Redes Cordiais and advisor at Albright Stonebridge Group. Alana has spent over the last decade as an investigative journalist in several of Brazil's leading media outlets. She's covered politics and economics with a focus on the relationship between business and government. Our next speaker is Ricardo Senes. He's managing partner at Prospectiva Consultoria in Brazil, as well as non-resident senior fellow both at SEBRI and here at the Adrian Arsh Latin America Center of the Atlantic Council. Currently, Senes covers everything from political to economic scenarios, development and implementation of public policies. So very well-rounded to be able to provide some perspectives today. And our third speaker is Hussein Kalouch. He's a political scientist and research scholar at Harvard University and former Special Secretary of Strategic Affairs in Brazil from 2016 to 2018. He's worked as a senior consultant at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil, as well as the Brazilian Supreme Court and the Prosecutor General of the Republic Office in Brazil. Before we get started then, I just want to remind everyone that today's hashtag is #ACBrazil. You can engage with us on Twitter, and if you'd like to ask questions throughout the event, you can just feel free to do so by typing them into the chat box at the bottom right of your screen, and we'll be taking questions as they come in throughout the event. So let's get started. Ricardo, I'd like to pose the first question to you. As I mentioned, a lot has happened in Brazil over the past few weeks and months, and even more over the last hour alone. And so I wanted to ask if you could start us off with a very brief overview of the latest developments on COVID in Brazil, as well as the steps the Brazilian government has taken to address the health implications in particular of the crisis.
Hey, thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Teresa. It's really a pleasure to be back to these discussions that the Atlantic Council has been promoting, and also be together with my colleagues, Hussein, Alana. Well, just to start our conversation about the crisis, how this crisis has been affecting Brazil, I think the best way to give a broad view about that is the responses in Brazil concerning this crisis. Basically, I think the best word to describe this is duality or ambiguity. Actually, we have in all different levels of the Brazilian strategy to against this crisis, we have this permanent and confusion between different strategies to address the same problem. The first duality, I think, we are in the middle of the federal administration. The federal administration are really divided in two different pieces, in two different parts, in two different groups. We have a clear leadership from the Bolsonaro team and his more close allies, following the idea that this crisis is not that dangerous for the country, for the population, that we should be much more focus on vertical isolation rather than quarantine or etc. That the focus is basically the problem is economic, it's not a health issue. And we have in the same administration other team that we call here in Perspectiva as the pragmatic team. It's the Minister of Health, the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Infrastructure, the Minister of Agribusiness, and others that has the same approach of the majority of the countries, and including the World Health Organization. So we have this duality within the federal administration. But we do have a duality also between the federal administration and the state administration. The state level in Brazil has been taking a completely different approach to this crisis. They basically the governors of São Paulo and Rio, in which the disease start to be stronger than the other parts of Brazil. These two leaders, the state level leaders, these two governors, they have decided very quickly to implement a very hard social isolation strategy. They are very much focused on leading in both in terms of political leadership and also in terms of coordinating the health strategies toward this crisis. They were very active. And they were followed by the other governors. Right now, we have a quite good cooperation among governors, focused in the idea that social isolation right now is the best alternative. So this is the second duality. We have two different responses for this crisis. In the third duality, I would say that in Brazil, we have the majority of the tools, the programs that focus economic issues are related to the federal administration. In the issues that are more directly related to health, public health, they are managed by the state level. So again, we have a third duality. That means at the state level, that basically controls the majority of the institutions and the facilities to address the public health. So they are doing that, but they are a little bit out of the debate about the economic consequence, because the tools in the resource that are related to the economic crisis are very much concentrated in the federal administration. So this is, I think, duality in Brazil would be the best way to try to address this very complicated issue.
Actually, that's a perfect segue for my next question, Ricardo. I'm actually going to pose this both to Hussein and Alana. And it's a little bit on the political side. So we'll talk a little bit of the political side and a little bit of the economic implications as well. But anyone's been following Brazil since the first cases of COVID were confirmed, you've seen that on the one hand, Brazilians have taken to the streets to protest social distancing measures, while on the other hand, many that are in social isolation and following those health directives have taken to banging pots and pans together in protest from their windows as a means of speaking out against some of the stances that have been adopted by the government. And so, Alana and Hussein, my question to you is, how do you think that we've seen politics playing out in how people perceive the implications of the pandemic? And how do you see this affecting Brazil's perception abroad, especially as we've seen a lot of media coverage of the reactions from the government here in the US and other countries? Hussein, I'll start with you. I think you might be muted, actually. There you go.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Atlantic Council for this very honorable invitation, and also Sabri for this effort, and to salute my friend Ricardo and also Alana. So let's jump directly to your question. But allow me, please, first to build up about in what kind of stage are we right now in Brazil? And since this government has arrived to power, the first thing it is the way how the president play politics is based on creating social cleavages and disrupting the domestic dialogue among all the political players. His strategy has been forged, in my perception, in two main objectives. One is to be permanently seen by the public as the anti-establishment leader. And secondly, to strengthen the new political landscape that he wants to forge through social media by endorsing and creating a new right-wing platform. To implement these two strategies, actually, and to make it functioning, he needs basically three components, and he relies on these three components: antagonism within the political system, discrediting the media, and attacking the institutions. So, in the last 60 months, that has been the strategy of governance. But to make that functioning perfectly and to have some rewards out of it, you need a stable economic boundaries. Yeah. And so far, the economic growth remain low. The attraction of investment remain also low. And only the pension reforms have been approved due especially the effort of the Speaker of the House, Rodrigo Maia. All the other reforms has been stuck. And to be very fair, that is not the responsibility of the Congress, either the House or the Senate. And somehow the government did not address the bills to the House yet, either the fiscal one or the administrative one. So the Brazilian population has realized that we are with the lack of leadership, and we are empty of any palatable and reliable strategic plan with right public policies to address and to pass over this crisis. So in my perception, all this together has also another implication: how the world sees Brazil, how our partner sees Brazil, how the private sector oversees see Brazil. And their main assessment is the lack of confidence with a government has what Ricardo said, ambiguities. So ambiguities either in foreign policies, ambiguities either in attacking China in one hand, and the other day trying to talk to settle the diplomatic setup with China, and then attacking China again, and that has been going so on in the last couple of months, and especially during this crisis. If I can resume, I can resume it, what we don't have is a clear perception about what this government wants beside to be re-elected.
I'd actually like to tie that comment that you made, the comment you made earlier about the strategy and sort of the approach of the government, with some of the comments that Ricardo made earlier, and combine those with a question that we got from the audience. They beat me to asking it, but Alana, the question is to you, although the others can weigh in certainly as well. It's one of the more timely questions now, which is, with the Minister of Health, Mandetta, now fired and likely to be replaced with Nelson Teich, the oncologist, what do you think this will mean for the government's response to the crisis? Do you foresee a change in the approach from the government now with this transition? And that's for you, Alana.
Yes, sure. Hi. I'd like to thank the Atlantic Council for the invitation. It's great to be here. And I just want to comment something. I am in São Paulo right now, and there was a huge banging pots protest right now because of that's, like you said, that's something that is happening. I don't know, Ricardo, you're in Brazil too. Did you hear? Here where I am in São Paulo, it was huge. So I think that shows a little bit of the way that population is. Of course, we're dealing with a completely polarized situation here in Brazil, but I think it shows it's not going to be easy for Bolsonaro and for the government. The decision to fire Mandetta, it's not an easy decision, and social media, it's going to show this, and the protests and everything. But going back to your question, Roberta, I think there's a couple of questions that we're still making, and of course, we don't have the answers yet, but I think the first one is exactly who is the new Minister of Health. We already have the name, Nelson Teich, but still, it wasn't formally announced, at least until now. I don't know if that changed, but I think what everybody wants to know is who is this guy, who is this doctor that is coming on board? What are his main ideas? And I think there's two ideas here that people want to know. First one, it's about his position on the isolation, social distancing, and if that's going to change. I think it's not going to be a radical change. Ricardo and Hussein, I'd like to hear what you think, but I don't think it's going to be a completely different change from what Bolsonaro was doing, and also from what Mandetta was saying. I think he's going to try to be more in the middle. And I think the other question that we're all trying to answer is, what's his position on the chloroquine, on the drugs that the Minister of Health are gonna prescribe. That I think that's also something that we're still trying to understand. And I think his role on what Ricardo was saying, Hussein was saying, we have a lack of coordination. We have a lack of national strategy. What's his role right now? Is he gonna be the one who's gonna unify the narratives or not? Or is he only gonna play what the government wants? Is he open to dialogue? To open a dialogue with some Witzel in Rio, Dória in São Paulo, Eduardo Leite in Rio Grande do Sul? I think those are a couple of questions that I'm still trying to find the answer, but I think I don't see a big change right now from what we've seen and from what we know about him. Of course, it's something that just happened, but I don't think there's going to be a big change.
Ricardo, I'll pass it to you.
I would like to.
Roberta, I think thank you, Alan. I think this is it's very important to try to at least to address initially this challenge. Actually, I think we have a major political trap around this new minister, unfortunately. Basically, he was chosen. Actually, he's a guy who has been helping Bolsonaro since his election. He was at November 2018. He was considered to be the most likely new minister at that time. And Mandetta was chosen after, I think, after he has taken this position. And the basically issue that put Mandetta as a minister at that time was two elements. One, Mandetta has a history of a leader in the health issues in Brazil. He's a former health secretary at state level. He was an important leader in the Congress because he's a former congressman as well. So he's a kind of guy that has a train to deal with the political side of the health, public health issue in Brazil. And second, I think he's a guy who knows how to deal with the bureaucracy. The public health bureaucracy in Brazil is quite well trained, quite well coordinated. We have a strong institutions in that field, not just the National School of Public Health that has trained the majority of the officials in the minister and also in the state levels, but also they are quite well connected in these three levels of the Brazilian Federation. We have to remember that the public health in Brazil is a public policy that it's one of, I think, the best case of public policy in Brazil that best connect the three levels of the federation, the federal level, the state and municipality. So we operate in the public health in Brazil through what we call unified health system. That means that we have a division of attributions and division of resource at these three levels. If a leader, as a minister must be, is the leader of the public health policy in Brazil, doesn't know how to manage these three levels, how to manage these three resources, and that we have that comes from different procedures, it's very, very hard to operate in that field. So I will make this comment, Alana, in a sense that differently from the Mandetta, Nelson doesn't have these skills. He's quite well trained in terms of academia. He has a PhD in the oncology. He has been training business and health abroad, I think in UK, in the York University. He has been playing an important role in the private sector in Brazil in this area.
I think this is something that you mentioned that I think is super interesting, because Mandetta had a public sector experience and he has a private experience. Maybe it is an opportunity for the private and public sector work together. But I would also like to comment something that you just mentioned, Ricardo, this is a political trap. And I think there's another political trap that we have to mention. That is the social media. Is Nelson Teich ready to deal with with social media, with the hate cabinet working 24 hours a day, 24 hours? I think that's also something that everyone that works in this government needs to be ready to deal with social media.
I think that let me jump to that. I think Ricardo brought to our attention and to the audience the question about the trap. And here, this is a really important point. Are we going to have a new health minister capable to decide based on health protocol, okay, and worldwide health standards, or he is being posted at that ministry just to fulfill the requirement of Bolsonaro's narrative? And here is the point, so he needs someone to sit at that chair and basically legitimate all what Bolsonaro wants, or he's gonna acting accordingly to the international protocol. This is the main challenge, and that's what Bolsonaro has been reluctant since the beginning, At the end, and ultimately, he is counting on votes, and he wants to analyze what will be the impact of the economy and what will be the consequences and implication for his re-election. So from day one of his term, or even the day one from this crisis, he only looking through the re-election. He's not focusing about the health. Look, for instance, when the government, when the crisis started, the first thing first, how the government addressed the whole circumstance by not offering a single project on and addressing the vulnerable people, the unemployed. Their plan was, okay, we have to put Eletrobras to privatize that, and afterwards, the amount of money that we collect from it, well, likely we get distributed for health insurance, public, whatever. So that doesn't work. And if you look through, if wasn't the Congress taking leadership and presenting a bill right away and approving that to help the population, we really were in the dark. And one more factor, Bolsonaro lost the capability to govern. Look what the Supreme Court has did recently in two important decisions. One, that the government cannot make any public propaganda against the quarantine. And that what they were doing. Second, in another decision of the Supreme Court, modulating the public policy, the president cannot force or impede whatever decision is taken in the state level or in the municipal level. So that basically amputated Bolsonaro's capability to act with any public reliable policy. That is the point. And that's what we're talking about, you know. So that I want to highlight these elements to show what will be the role of this new Minister of Health. It is basically, he gonna deal with all those elements, or he will be there just to say, well, I have to give to Bolsonaro's speech certain credential to be accepted by the public, and that is the point.
Hussein, I'd actually like to build on that. I want to move to the economic impact, but before I do, I will ask one more question. And you brought up the elections, you brought up sort of the campaign narratives, and you brought up the executive branch's relationship with the legislative and the judiciary. And so my questions are, first, what do you think, or what do you all think, actually this could be to Ricardo and Alan as well, what are the consequences of the health crisis for the remainder of President Bolsonaro's term? How does this impact the executive branch's relationship with the judiciary? And third, with municipal elections coming up in October, if they still go ahead as planned, if things are different by then, what could we expect as a result of those elections, especially given the visibility that the local state governments have been given lately in their addressing of the crisis? And I think I'll start with you, Alana, on that.
Perfect. That's something that I think is really interesting to think about the impact on our elections. If we have elections, I think that's, I don't know if everybody is aware, but there is a discussion right now in Brazil. If we're having the elections on October, that's how it was planned, or if should we move to the end of the year or even to 2022, that's something that I don't think it's plausible. If it moves, I think would be more by the end of the year, but it's a local elections, and it's a completely different elections from national elections. It's the type of elections that it's you have to walk on the streets, you have to hug people. You know, it's more it's a type of elections that you need to have contact with voters, and we are in a completely different scenario right now. So I think there's going to be a huge impact. So what I think is going to be moving even more to social media. It's going to be in elections that it's going to move, you know, like we already have an elections that in the whole war, even with the pandemic, it is in the digital scenario, but these elections, I think, is going to be even more in social media. And I think it's going to be interesting to see the presence of this hate cabinet and the Bolsonaro supporters online, and how this narrative is going. Because when you think about the national narrative, it is on Twitter. It is more. It's more on a national sense. But when you go to WhatsApp and other social medias, you know, like you go deeper on the local level. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. And I think there is a huge impact. I was talking to Beto Vasconcelos, former Secretary of Justice, also advisor at ASG. And we're talking about the implications. And he said something that I would like to share with you, because we were discussing the importance of this. If Bolsonaro's narrative really wins, and kind of, in a sense, it gets support, it gets attraction, and the pandemic is not that bad in Brazil, of course, I don't think, according to the data and everything that we have, it's likely not it's not going to happen. But then he becomes the main force, and he doesn't have a party, so it doesn't matter. It's not a political force. He is the political force, and that changes a lot because then he can choose who he wants to support. It doesn't matter if you're from the opposition party. It doesn't matter. He chooses. He can decide. But if it all goes wrong and he takes responsibility for it, or people looks at him and see he is responsible for what happens in Brazil, the numbers of death and the economic crisis, then the governors that are leading this crisis and are on the opposite side of him, they are the political forces that I think are going to drive attention, and they're going to be the ones who can decide where and to where the political forces are going. I think it's still a lot of uncertainty right now, but I can see those two scenarios. If Bolsonaro's decisions somehow people understands, of course, he's still with his 30%. If somehow people sees he was the one who made a good decision, then he's the big political force. If not, then the governors, I think, they're going to be the ones who can move this puzzle.
Ricardo, do you have anything to add to that? We also do have a question from the audience about the potential for the emergence of a more centrist candidate that could eventually challenge Bolsonaro in a re-election, or another candidate from, say, the Workers' Party or somewhere else.
Robert, before we go to this last question about the potential of a centrist leader, let me move back to your first question, that is, what may be the consequence for the rest of the Bolsonaro administrations after this crisis? And I will start with this exactly same perception and analysis that Hussein made. I think we have an enormous paradox right now in Brazil that is part of this puzzle, as Alana mentioned. Actually, if we take Bolsonaro as a reference, the relation that Bolsonaro established with the Congress, with the judiciary, with the governors, with the international forums like United Nations or International Health Organization. So in all these aspects and all this linkage, Bolsonaro has been damaged the traditional way of Brazil of managing all these relations. So we have never had something like this way of operate that Bolsonaro has. So if you take as a reference these important political decision-making people, both at federal level and the state level in Brazil, including the judiciary, I think we have a situation of almost a completely political isolation of Bolsonaro. So I think this is critical. Even, as I said in the beginning, even within his administration, the administration is divided in two pieces. Probably the military wings are in the middle, but there are two different administrations right now in Brazil. But let me add one thing, another aspect on that. If you go to the public opinion, if you take the polls, it's amazing how Bolsonaro continues to have a support about 35% of the population. I would say, like now, the last poll that I have saw that was yesterday, that's been reduced to 30%. So that means that 30% of popular support in Brazil is a lot. There is no any other political leader in Brazil with the same capacity to manage with this portion, this size of the public opinion. So this, I think, is a paradox. He's completely isolated in terms of political relation, both within his administration, with the Congress, judiciary, but at the same time, as Alana mentioned, he continues to address a specific agenda for a specific portion of the Brazilian population, and they works exactly in the way of the conflict strategy this defines. He doesn't have the profile of a leader that builds coalition, that builds consensus. His leadership is based on conflict. And and he has been pursuing this since the beginning of his administration. there is some explanation for continue to have 30% of support, because he has been pushing his administration for this 30% of people. So that means that it's not easy to think about what will be the political accommodation in the future. With 30% of support in population, he cannot be removed. I think the impeachment that has been a part of the public debate in Brazil, I think is very, very difficult to have right now. That must be added to something else. For instance, a deep economic crisis that we may face in the 6 month time or 1 year. That will be another important element to add to the political isolation. But right now, we will probably have to live with this situation. That is a paradox, a completely political isolated president with important support in the Brazilian society, with no other leader that has the same portion of popularity. So I don't know, Hussein, if we have a solution for that, but I'm very, very pessimist about the near future in Brazil.
Actually, Ricardo, but Hussein, before you weigh in, the next question is actually going to you. So I think I'll combine the two things, which is, Ricardo, you brought up the economic crisis, which I think is a good point for us to pivot toward the economic implications of the crisis. So Hussein, my question to you, and feel free to weigh into what Ricardo said as well, but it's, given the economic inequality, the rates of inequality, there's still a huge issue in Brazil. What are some of the most immediate economic consequences for Brazil of the pandemic, one? And two, what can be done to mitigate an economic downturn in the medium term and in the longer term?
Wow, this is a
no
very
easy
challenging. Well, Roberto, this is really, really a challenging question. Well, this okay, depend the take that you want to address it. So before to go to the economy, I'm gonna stick a little bit for a couple of seconds with politics, and to build up about what wisely Ricardo said and what Elena has emphasized. Actually, Bolsonaro, since the beginning, he realized that the polarization is the best way to keep him as one of the contenders in the political dispute. Without polarization, he will be a weak player. So polarizing has two double effects. One, you consolidate a permanent base that will be loyal to you no matter what the economic perspective are, no matter what mistake you do, either politically or economically, or in terms of whatever public policy, these people will remain loyal to you. And the second effect of his strategy is to show that he is the only one that could defeat the left wing. So he presents himself as the savior against the left wing potential to return back to power, to those 30%. And what is interesting, and that we should explore a bit deeply, from these 30% that he has consolidated, how much among these 30% belongs to the evangelical spectrum? And this is really important. So his main objective is to consolidate a permanent base where, no matter what, in any election, he will be a real player actor. So going to the economic, and in between, the center will be capable to handle it in the next election? Well, yes and no. That will depend if the center will come with multiple candidates. If the center comes with multiple candidates, then they will be fragmented. And that's what Bolsonaro wants at the end, is to repeat the same method as the last election in 2018, to have the worker party against him again, and to put the population among a choice. Would you want the left wing, these communists, whatever you want to call it, how he's back in power, or the alternative is me. I am the savior. So, so the center has to agree in a name, has to agree in a reliable project. Otherwise, that we will have the same scenario again in 2018. And what is really crucial when you look to the manifestation that is happening in Sao Paulo, in Rio, among the major cities in Brazil against Bolsonaro, these are the middle upper class. They could be crucial, but at the same time, they could be crushed. So the outcome of that, how the center will reorganize its strategy, and how they will be capable to drag these people back to their main political field. About the economy, I think no question the consequences of the crisis are disastrous to whole Brazilians, and particularly to those that they are in a vulnerable situation. We have around like 13 to 14 million of unemployed Brazilians, and we have around more 30 millions of Brazilians that they work on the informality, So it's a lose-lose game. Solution to mitigate that, it's with so strong social program of wealth redistribution. If you don't have a long-term financial aid that directed to people in vulnerability and to the uh, small and medium entrepreneurs, the productivity of the Brazilian economy will be damaged for at least 1 decade. And that is the main puzzle that the economic team has to address it.
Hussein, actually, that's a really good segue into an audience question, actually, regarding the discussion here in the US. Market players have been discussing how the government might need to be expanding support to small businesses and to small companies. And so, Alan and Ricardo, my question to you is like, do you expect the same to happen in Brazil? And how do you all assess the government's response to the economic crisis, especially in regard to the economic vulnerability of certain populations in Brazil? Elena, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think at least from what we've seen, I think the economic they took a while to respond to the crisis, but then now they are already responding. And I think the whole government took a while to respond to it, but their focus right now, it is in the small and medium enterprises. I think from what we've seen until now, the loans and credits are focused in the small and medium enterprises. But I think I would like to bring attention to also something that we mentioned in the beginning. I think there's an opportunity for not only, of course, the government is going to play the main role here. And I think there's a role that we need to see that we haven't seen yet. There is this cooperation with states, with municipalities, but also a cooperation with private sector. I think that's something that it's at least I've been seeing a lot. Companies are doing a lot of things. Civil society, they're also planning. I think that there's a need of coordination and there's a need of a strategy here, combining economics and health, but also public policies that target, that target small and medium enterprises, but also that target the most vulnerable population. I think there is room to build this dialogue. I think there is, of course, the government is going to have to take the risks of it, but I think we need to see more cooperation between different stakeholders and different actors right now, especially focus on those two groups, most vulnerable people, but also small and medium enterprises.
Alan, actually a follow-up question on that specific point. I know the federal government in Brazil is giving about 600 reais, around $150 to 60 million Brazilians, and it's an effort to alleviate the burden of the quarantine. Do you see these measures as effective? What more can be done or should be done to assist the population?
Yes, of course. On the short term, it is super important because right now, if you take people out of their works, and of course, Hussein just mentioned the numbers of people that are unemployed and work that have informal jobs. So of course, you need to, if you are making them stay at home and following all the measures, the WTO and the recommendations, you have to give them something for them to survive. I think what we're talking right now, it's about surviving. There's a big amount of people in Brazil that you need to give that so they can survive. They can eat. They need, they need this to eat. They need this to survive. So I think it is super important, but it's on the short term. We don't know for how long this crisis is going to take. But I think there is also another question here that is, are we getting to all the vulnerable people? Because I think there's a need here to map. Is this what we call here Corona voucher? Is it getting to everyone that really needs, or how are we going to address? How we're going to find those people? They're not in the system, or that can't have access to internet, So I think there is a need here to, of course, it is super important and it tackles a really urgent need, but I think there is a need to plan and to try to find other people that are not in the radar.
No, that absolutely makes sense. Ricardo, I will pass it on to you, but I'll tack on another question. It's a little bit more longer term in focus, which is a little bit what Hussein brought up earlier about the reforms that were being implemented and how they've been affected. We know that Brazil was implementing a series of reforms to help revamp the economy. They were medium to long term in nature. Now, with the economy expected to shrink this year, what has the Ministry of the Economy prioritized to alleviate the cost of the delays to some of these reforms?
Roberta, I think this is the more right now. I think besides the health issue, this is the most important question right now in Brazil. And I think the ambiguity is the best way to describe the economic answer of this administration. Why I'm saying ambiguity? First, I think three topics can be discussed here. One, likewise, the president, the Minister of Guedes, started saying that this crisis is not that important. That right now, in order to face this crisis, the best option will be foster the macroeconomic reforms. That the short-term measures is not that important, etc., etc., etc. So the first response was quite a negative response, and say, let's move as the way we are being or we are trying to move. So denying the urgency and the deepness of this crisis. So when we saw the interview that an important official from the Ministry of Economy they gave last Monday, I think, was he bring back the same questions. Look, we can do 2 or 3 measures to relieve at least a minimum the sufferers, but we must be focused on macroeconomic reforms. So I think this is a part of the administration continue to think in that way, and the other part of the administration understands that facing as I said, shrinking, we are expecting a minus 5% of the Brazilian GDP this year. And we are not sure that we are talking about a V format of crisis, or a double or a U or a L, because there is no, as Hussein said before, the lack of confidence in the political coordination and the political response for this crisis has been affect a lot the economic players, both foreign companies, foreign governors, foreign countries, whatever. That means that if we not have a single and direct response for these players, I think the lack of confidence will affect a lot Brazil. So this is the first topic. The second is, as Alana mentioned, the short-term measures, including this direct income transfer, to the population, and basically the most vulnerable population in Brazil, including the people who works in informality, and I think was the best answer until now that we have. It's a directly 3 months period income transfer directly to the public through the public banks to the people in the families. Doesn't matter if this guy has any other political social condition. If he has a profile to receive the money, he will receive, and I think this program is going quite well. What would be the problem? It would be another two problems, two issues. One, what you can do for reduce the damage in the companies during the crisis. Because Brazil, if you take the profile of the companies in Brazil, they are like that. We have a few big companies in Brazil and 1,000 million of small size and medium sized companies. These millions of small and medium sized companies, they will not survive 3 months. They will basically broke. And if these companies are broken in 3 months' time, we can have 10% of GDP growth in December that will not recover these companies. We will broke the production linkage that we need for every single important industry in Brazil. And we don't see right now strong answers. We do have answers for this question, but they are not strong enough in my perception, aligned with several economists in Brazil. And this, I think, this is a dramatic second question. And the third question is, in terms of long term, we need to be prepared as soon as the social isolation start to flexibilize. We need to be prepared to recover the economic dynamic in Brazil. For instance, we have right now part of the ambiguity of this administration. The Ministry of Infrastructure has presented a package of public investment in infrastructure right now in October, November, and December. What has been the answer from the Minister of Economy? Let's think. Well, I don't know if this is a good. Of course, every other country are doing the same. We need a package of expanding in 3-4 months' time to recover the economy, and there is no other option rather than the government to do that. And we need in Brazil a package for infrastructure, a package for agribusiness, a package for service in general, and not just the commercial side of the service sector, but all the other sectors that are related to segments that are related to service. So we need package to recover the economy and show the people that is right now suffering the economic crisis. Look, we have a window of opportunity in 3-4 months' time. Please stay in business. Please continue to sustain your labors. Please continue to be following for alternatives to survive, because in 3-4 months' time we will be back to business. And the government is failing in give a strong message in that direction. So I think these are the three questions that, again, I think the ambiguity of this administration are failing in performance.
Hussein, Alana, I'll pose this question to you as well. I know we have about 7 minutes left, so this is my last question on the economic side before we look ahead. But my question was regarding Ricardo's comments about industries. So if both you and Hussein could expand a little bit on the effects on industries specifically. So how have these industries been adapting, and what has also been the effect on supply chains, and how can supply chains be adapting to deal with this and sort of alleviate some of the economic burden more long term? Go ahead, Alana, and then Hussein.
I was just gonna build on what Ricardo was saying about this lack of dialogue. I think that's also that's the point that I would like to make, that I've been talking a lot. There's a lack of dialogue. And, like, if you can't communicate with the private sector, stay in business, like in 3 months, we're going to be ready. We can connect the supply chain. We need this, and you can, do the industrial rivers. I think there is, if they don't start talking, all the sectors, if we don't start talking, then of course the crisis is going to be even longer. It's going to be even tough. for us to recover. So I think, and Hussein mentioned something that I think we've been seeing a lot, the lack of, and Ricardo also mentioned, the lack of confidence, the lack of trust. If businessmen and businesswomen decide, get this pessimist, gets so pessimistic, and that's something that we're all living, of course, tough times right now. But if we don't have an answer, or at least we don't have a message, a clear message of why should we stay in business, what can I do, how can I be helpful to drive the country through this crisis? Everybody wants to do something, and I've been seeing this a lot, and you probably have seen it in different countries. Everybody wants to be part of the solution. Of course, people who has potential, people who can be part of the solution, they want to put effort on it. So I think there is a need, an urgent need to build this dialogue, and the industry is missing. The industry, I'm telling a little bit of what I've been listening. The industry wants to be part of the discussion, and this lack of confidence, this lack of trust, if we don't address really soon, of course, the consequences are going to be even worse.
So Hussein, for you, how can industries, how can these actors be a part of the more long-term solutions? What more can be done?
Well, I will bring that from my experience from the government, the previous one. You cannot build the solution, economic solution to the market and to the industry without speaking and hearing their demands. You have to deal with the reality, and you have to listen about what are mostly the impact about the goods and regulation and taxation and so on. So you cannot frame whatever public policy without to discuss with the industrial sector. So this is one. Either you agree or not with them. Either when you want to open the economy or want to close it, you want to make a industry reversal action or not. So you have to, no matter what, to discuss. They are part of the solution. So this is first. Secondly, I think that we are for the industrial sector, the supply chain has to readapt for a new reality in the world. One has to adapt more than the other, that for sure. But all, in my perception, have to adapt. For instance, some of the infrastructure, like let's see, the chemical industrial sector, the machinery, who depends on the imports of goods for their production, they have to recalibrate totally the supply chain. Secondly, the currency. So the currency and the devaluation has a double side impact, one good and one bad. For some sector, the impact is massively bad, and for other, well, to whom that they are capable to export and they are not dependent on importing good from the outside of the country, that is an asset. So, and here you have to find the balance between one another. For instance, like the service sector will be hugely damaged by this pandemic. The civil construction as well. Civil construction has been in Brazil one of the main vehicle of maintaining the ball kicking within our economy. So how are you going to address that? And this sector employs so much people, and especially people from the middle lower class. So how are you going to address it? Ultimately, in my opinion, we have to discuss broadly. We have to listen to all the industrial sector. We have to build the solution with them and not without them. They has to be part of that. To conclude, and we are also facing a new reality, and then the future of Brazil will depend on that. We are a strong powerhouse of agribusiness, and we are the top leader food supplier in the world, and the world will become more dependent on us. How are we gonna play this role in the future? And this is crucial also to think about it, So we are between a limited, if I may say, challenges, and the solution has to be constructed by all, not by the government only, as I said.
No, absolutely. We are just out of time. It's 5 o'clock now. I wanted to thank you so much, all of our speakers, those who tuned in, for all of your insights, comments, and questions. I will say that this video will be posted on the same registration link that you used to participate today. We'll have a brief summary up as well, and stay tuned for follow-up of this event on social media. We'll continue having conversations here at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center about Brazil, about Brazil's relationships abroad, economics, politics, democracy. And so stay tuned for additional conversations as well over the coming weeks. Thank you to Sabri again, and to everyone who joined. And thank you so much to our speakers. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you, Ricardo and Alana. Good to see you all.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Bye
And
bye.
Sabri.